In the summer of 2019, I traveled to Bauto, Inner Mongolia, to make a series of lifestyle stock photographs. Bauto is considered the rare earth elements capital of the world. An 8-hour drive west of Beijing, Bauto sits on the northern banks of the Yellow River in northwest China's autonomous region of Inner Mongolia. Rare earth elements are a group of minerals that are essential ingredients in most consumer electronics like smartphones, digital cameras, and batteries, as well as in electric cars and wind turbines. My photographs depict imagined aspirations of upwardly mobile middle class in this rapidly evolving mining boomtown. They also reference recent geopolitical history of the region, loss of Inner Mongolian self-determination, industrialization, environmental degradation, and rise to dominance of the global rare earth elements industries. Inner Mongolia was traditionally a Mongolian ethnic region that wasn't wholly incorporated into China until the 50s, when Mao Zedong developed it into a military industrial region for the nation. The status and expressions of cultural identity in frontiers, territories are complicated. In the process of drawing borders, non-dominant ethnicities must be incorporated into the state's own identity without being a threat to the state culture. Territories, semi-autonomous regions, and borders are the concrete designations of statecraft. Historically, the ecospatial cultural realities of border territories and frontiers are porous, amorphous, and nomadic. A Han majority was achieved through generations of occupation, miscegenation, and annexation. During the Second World War, various communities within Inner Mongolia aligned themselves with different regional factions. The Chinese Nationalist Party, the KMT, a pan-Mongolian unification effort supported by the USSR, and the Japanese as colonial occupiers. Ultimately, the region was pacified by and aligned with the newly formed Chinese Communist Party in 1947. Strategic partnerships between the Chinese Communist Party and the USSR in 1950s resulted in agreements over mineral extraction rights, steel, and military industrial development throughout the region, technology sharing, and the creation and testing of China's first atomic bomb in 1964 at Plant 202 in Bauto. Much recent migration to Bauto comes from outside the region. Most capital investment for new factories and labor to fill them is imported from wealthier provinces. While scouting for film locations in the city, we drove past factories and rows of aerial cranes building the city's new gated townhouses, condo towers, and shopping malls. Our taxi driver, a 40-ish local ethnically Mongolian man, said, "Local people earn very little while people from the south are running the businesses. The place belongs to us, but we are only workers, employees for people from southern provinces like Zhejiang." Yet the Chinese state culture must support the notion of multiculturalism in order to maintain order, legitimacy, and national support for its hegemony over these populations and territories. The Belt and Road Initiative, the global development plan branded as the New Silk Road in 2013, has amplified the scale of Chinese global capital investment, industrial manufacturing export, as well as construction and logistics projects. The Belt and Road Initiative has made securing national identity, territories, and borders a priority. My visit coincided with an ongoing United States-China trade war that began in part over the trade imbalance between the two countries. In this climate, I felt I must approach my work with a heightened sensitivity to the political nature of the subject and to the personal security of the people helping me. While planning my trip, friends and family warned of the risks that might befall an American man making documentary photographs in the mines and industrial sites around Bauto, or worse still, any Chinese local assisting him. My cousin's wife, originally from Bauto, offered to help, but when she learned that the subject was rare earth elements, she refused to involve her family with any project that might be judged critical of local industry or the government. Her fear proved well-founded. One evening, after trying to book a room in Bayan Abo, the town closest to the rare earth mines, my assistant Jackie and I were returning to our hotel room in Baotou when we were informed by the manager that we needed to check out immediately. Though we'd been there for 4 days, he'd forgotten to mention that foreigners aren't allowed to stay there. Stock photography is intentionally generic and latent, raw, if you will. Its final usefulness has yet to be realized. Stock photography image banks are like mining companies in how they extract these raw materials, mold them into commercial products, and bestow them with an exchange value. Rare earth elements follow in an ubiquitous, distributed, if material, flow similar to digital imagery. They are used to manufacture digital camera sensors, lenses, the batteries that power the cameras, and the wind turbines and solar panels that power the batteries. To make my project Rare Earth Image Bank, I utilized the seemingly innocuous genre of lifestyle stock photography as a slightly covert means of referencing the complicated histories and potential futures of the site without attracting censure from local authorities, and to simultaneously create a product that will recirculate through local and international image markets in tandem to the booming economy and increasing wealth of Baotou. While filming in a Western model condo in a Baotou housing complex, potential buyers were led by salesmen past our photo shoot to see the fully staged apartments. We arranged a trade with the developer. We would use the model apartment for our family dinner photograph, and he would use our photographs for promoting his development. Downstairs, the entrance to the complex was festooned for a country fair food carnival, go-kart rides for the kids, a Ferris wheel, and a scale model of the future development. I was reminded of similar Sunday home tours with my family in Casper, Wyoming in the 70s. We coveted the latest home and garden designs on offer for a newly risen and aspirational middle-class family. On the modest salaries of a school teacher and a salesman, my parents built a new house and raised 3 children in a city funded by extraction. Much of the work for actors in Inner Mongolia is playing extras for film and television in historical period dramas, and performing traditional Mongolian dance, horsemanship, arts, and culture for the annual domestic tourist industry. American anthropologist Dean McCannell has described this global practice as a Disneyfication of cultural identity and difference that stages reality as a reflection of tourists' imagination. This pacification of the indigenous culture in frontier zones has a bifurcated effect, turning culture into a token and performance while subverting the political and economic self-determination of indigeneity and its material resources from the population. The yurt camp where I stayed while filming was founded by Gu Tao, an award-winning local experimental and documentary filmmaker, and staffed in a cooperative manner by a band of censored artists, misfits and outsiders who host an annual documentary filmmaking camp. The range of their interests and film subjects comprise a kind of salvage anthropology of Northeastern ethnic minorities, including local nomadic pastoralist communities, yurt architectural preservation, shamanism, and hunting. From their camp in Shilamuren, each summer night, you can watch the light shows and fireworks mounted for ethnic performances at neighboring tourist resorts. While meeting with a local photographer in Baotou, I relayed to him through my assistant some locations and models I was looking for. A modern-looking electric car dealership, a new middle-class gated housing development, a modern architect studio, an attractive Mongolian child to hold a sheep, a mature Mongolian man to sit working on a laptop in a field. The photographer was puzzled by why I thought these images would show the reality of Inner Mongolia and the rare earth element industry. After all, he said, real Baotou people don't look like models and they don't drive electric cars. If his reaction was indicative of how my pictures will be received, then perhaps my intentions are effective. Not realism, but aspiration. My photographs comment on the realities in Baotou and its rare earth mining industry by not showing the sacrifices it has made to its environment and public health. Could images of clean, affordable wind power and harmonious communities driving electric cars represent the future success of the Belt and Road Initiative? Only in pictures. What could be a more benign form of imagery? A family sitting down to enjoy a meal together in their newly decorated apartment. A soldier returns home for the holidays. A young female engineer tunes the efficiency of a new wind farm. These illustrations speak in a commercial marketing language about progress toward a better society where prosperity is the norm and where old problems of civil strife and ecological damage have been eliminated. When I returned to Los Angeles, I licensed the photographs to Getty Images iStock so that the abstraction of the affect, emotion, and culture they represent folds back into commerce. Now they're selling steadily and finding new uses beyond my expectations. There's one image I recently uploaded to the iStock site as a Trojan horse that surreptitiously breaks the fourth wall. A professional woman in a red dress writes her design thoughts on a glass office wall. The message, written in Inner Mongolian script, is the last lines of the 1954 film Salt of the Earth. The McCarthy-era film dramatizes the struggle of Mexican miners organizing for equal wages and safety in a New Mexico zinc mine. An Inner Mongolian reader may ascertain the slippage of the image from its presumed role as mere corporate promotion. Then I knew we had won something they could never take away, something I could leave to our children, and they, the salt of the earth, would inherit it. 2,000 years ago, the Chinese and Greeks had nearly identical terms to describe the abstract character of money. The Greeks used the word symbolon, symbol, and the Chinese used the term fu hao, also symbol. Symbolon were everyday objects like a plate or a ring chosen to represent an agreement between friends. They were broken in two, and each party took half to remind them of their promise. Tally sticks in China are the same. A piece of wood is notched to mark an agreement, then broken in half. In other words, the half represents a relationship of debt. Photographs, like symbolon, tally sticks, and money, are also forms of debt. They split the world in half, severing reality from representation. More and more, we occupy ourselves with the replica instead of the original. When I traveled to the Buddhist caves in Dunhuang, China in 2018, I was considering the similarities between money and photographs. It helped me to see how China promotes its new global infrastructure program, the Belt and Road Initiative, through culture. The Belt and Road Initiative is a neo-colonial finance program, not unlike the World Bank or International Monetary Fund, that lends money to partner countries in Eurasia and Africa. The object of the program is to develop new markets that will allow the Chinese economy to continue to grow. When China's premier, Xi Jinping, refers to the Belt and Road Initiative as the new Silk Road, archaeological sites like Dunhuang, with their medieval histories of connectivity, cultural exchange, and international trade, are instrumentalized for his public relations campaign. An ideal site for this form of heritage diplomacy, Dunhuang's UNESCO World Heritage Site, Mogao Grotto, is a medieval temple site of nearly 700 caves carved into a sandstone cliff at the edge of the Taklamakan Desert. Mogao, with its history intertwined with Silk Road and Buddhism, is used to represent the height of Chinese culture, art, and early international trade. The Belt and Road Initiative finances infrastructure like roads, railways, and shipping terminals, but it also funds archaeological projects, so its partners too can promote their Silk Road histories, further amplifying China's development narrative. Construction on the cave temples began in 366 AD when Dunhuang was an important outpost on the Silk Road and gateway to the West. For centuries, it was a center for Buddhist learning and worship. Wealthy merchant families sponsored monks to build the caves and decorate them with elaborate murals and sculptures depicting the Buddhist sutras. During my introduction, a researcher showed me their ultra high resolution digital camera gifted by Microsoft and used to scan the caves for conservation purposes. The donation reminded me of a press release from Corbis, the first digital stock agency founded by Bill Gates in 1989. Quote, "The range of the company's visual content attempts to encompass the breadth of civilization, containing everything from reproductions of cave paintings to contemporary celebrity photographs." End quote. Corbis began their service by relicensing agreements with major cultural institutions like the Smithsonian Institute, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Barnes Foundation, and Seattle Art Museum. By 1995, Corbis changed its business model to gain more market share by buying outright famous stock agencies and historic image banks like French agency Sigma with its 40 million images, and image collections of the Library of Congress, the publishing house Condé Nast, the estate of Andy Warhol, and the estate of Ansel Adams. Eventually, Corbis possessed over 100 million images. Much of this trove remained in the physical form of prints, films, and negatives that were stored in file cabinets in their Manhattan offices. In an attempt to protect and preserve their investment, the company moved their collection to Iron Mountain Storage Facility in 2002. Iron Mountain is located in a disused limestone mine north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Stored at sub-zero temperatures, the Corbis archive is expected to survive for 5,000 years. Iron Mountain also houses documents for the US Patent and Trademark Office, the Census Bureau, and the Social Security Administration. Research communities worldwide criticize Gates for cloistering the cultural riches of his trove in a cave in the rural countryside. The value for Gates was not in the aura of the original, but in the accessibility of the copy. In 2016, he sold Corbis to the Chinese media company Unity Glory International for an undisclosed amount. Unity Glory immediately relicensed all of Corbis's imagery to their competitor, Getty Images. Photography is no longer permitted in the Mogao caves. The murals and sculptures are too sensitive to light. The Dunhuang Academy's tour guides wear robes inspired by Tang Dynasty fashion as they lead groups through the caves by flashlight. In order to get a closer look at the caves, you must visit their replicas next door in the Dunhuang Museum. The replica caves are painted with an almost absurd fidelity to the originals. Each scratch, stain, graffiti, or void is painstakingly fauxed to forensic precision, resulting in an alloy of representation and abstraction. In the Academy's sculpture studio, I met a young classically trained sculptor, Fu Xingbao, working on a clay model of a monk from Cave 328. Cave 328 is infamous, for it is there in 1924 that Langdon Warner, a Harvard art historian, stole a sculpture of a Buddha while on a collecting expedition for the Fogg Museum. Warner boasted in his book, The Long Road to China, that the paintings and sculptures he salvaged will prove treasures the like of which had never been seen in America, and which Berlin, with its wealth of frescoes sawn in squares from the stucco walls of Turkestan, might envy. Many suspect that Steven Spielberg modeled his character Indiana Jones on Langdon Warner. Inside the sculpture studio is a cosmopolitan jumble of molds, plaster, and fiberglass casts of Mogao Buddhas, busts of Michelangelo's David, four-headed Indian Shivas, and Genghis Khan. Inspired by Microsoft's gifted camera and Fu Xingbao's expert copying, I decided to make a 3D scan of the replica twin of the Buddha that Langdon Warner stole. A year later, I traveled to Dongguan, a city of factories in the Pearl River megapolis, an hour from Guangzhou and an hour from Shenzhen. Dongguan is known as the factory of the world and is where 6 million migrant workers travel for jobs annually. I came to Dongguan for a short residency at the Shanghai Art Center to show my Dunhuang cyanotypes, visit the factories, and meet cryptocurrency entrepreneurs in Shenzhen, and perhaps draw some lines between blockchain currencies and the financial systems of the Silk Road. The early forms of credit invented to ensure cargo along transnational trading routes, and the symbolic debts that merchants paid to heaven by sponsoring Buddhist caves at Mogao. In Shenzhen, I met Laura Zhu, founder of Tron One, China's second largest cryptocurrency, who told me that the charm of blockchain, this is a quote, the charm of blockchain is that everyone is the center, everyone is a node. A truly utopian optimism about the future of blockchain. The next day, Li Jinghu, a local Dongguan sculptor hosting me at Shanghai Art Center, took me to the local exhibition marking the 40th anniversary of Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms and Dongguan's postmodern economy. It was held in the ruins of the earliest factories in Dongguan. Down by the river, archival images of the early electronics assembly lines and collaborations with US toy makers like Mattel, antique circuit boards, documentary photographs of today's Dongguan workers, and contemporary art were installed inside the abandoned factory walls. China is already entering the post-industrial phase when art begins to repurpose the empty factory floors. Jinghu brought me to the alleys in his home village, Chang'an, a suburb of Dongguan, where he sources industrial trash for his sculptures. Color-coordinated plastics, glass baubles, ceramic tile samples, gold chain, chewed up cables, shattered iPhone screens, all destined for where? Foxconn, the Taiwanese maker of the iPhone, and China's domestic phone giant Oppo have major campuses in Dongguan. I made a new cyanotype on the recycling street as trucks lumbered past. On my last days there, a former student's cousin had arranged for me to visit her high school classmate's factory. After a huge meal in the Hunan restaurant across the street, he led me through his USB cable assembly line and across the street to a warehouse where he stocks his products for Amazon, personal vibrators, battery chargers, umbrellas, yoga mats. Before leaving, he took me to visit the workers' dormitories. I'd asked to visit, but I didn't anticipate how intrusive we'd be interrupting the workers on their break. I filmed the room as the women used their phones until a strong wind slammed the door shut. The film I made in Dunhuang and Dongguan, The Tally, is included in Towards a Raw Materialism, the show that you see here, which Simon Lung curated for the XMPL Gallery at the University of California at Irvine. I'll play it now. This is the 2-channel version that I'll be showing you, but at the exhibition, it's a single channel version, as you can see. Stop share for a second.
In Buddhism, there is an idea that engenders a theory of debt, karmic debt that must be paid in each reincarnation. Acts of self-sacrifice, such as donating one's fortune, endowing a religious artwork, or dedicating one's life to the temple, are ways of paying this debt. In practical terms, temples used people's donations to create some of the earliest forms of corporations, in which the monks collectively managed the money and property given to them. In medieval Chinese Taoism, when monks were ordained, they would hold a ceremony called rending the tally, where they would rip apart a piece of paper that represented a contract with heaven. These were literally tallies. The monk kept one, the other half was said to be retained by the gods. Such tallies were a form of celestial writing that could only be comprehended by the heavens. Analogously, the English word symbol comes from the Greek word symbolon, which originally meant tally, an object broken in half to record a debt. In ancient Greece, two friends at dinner might create a symbolon by taking an object, a ring, a bone, a dish, and breaking it in half. At any point in the future, when one needed the other's help, they could bring their half as a reminder of their promise. In The Gift, Marcel Mauss quotes British anthropologist Alfred Radcliffe Brown on the rituals of potlatch in the Andaman Islands. Brown writes, "In spite of the considerable volume of these exchanges, since the local group and the family, in other cases, know how to be self-sufficient in tools, etc., these presents do not serve the same purpose as commerce and exchange in other societies. The goal is above all a moral one, the objective being to foster friendly feelings between the two persons in question, and if the exercise failed to do so, everything failed." Nobody is free to refuse the present that is offered. Everyone, men and women, tries to outdo the other in generosity. A kind of rivalry existed to see who could give the greatest number of objects of the greatest value. These rituals of meeting after a long separation, the acts of embrace, the greetings made in tears, show how the exchange of presents is their equivalent, and how feelings and persons are mixed up together. In short, this represents an intermingling. Souls are mixed with things, things with souls. Lives mixed together And this is how, among persons and things so intermingled, each emerges from their own sphere and mixes together. This is precisely what contract and exchange are. Historically, tallies did away with the need for witnesses during transactions and exchange. For if the two surfaces of the tally match, then everyone knew that the agreement between the contracting parties existed as well. The striking thing about tallies is that even though they might begin as simple tokens of friendship and solidarity, in almost all later examples, what the two parties actually agree to create is a relationship of inequality, of debt, obligation, subordination to the other's orders. In Europe in the 19th century, a science of memory was developed. Because there could not be a science of the soul, a science of memory provided a surrogate for the soul. As a direct consequence of developing knowledge concerning memory, acquired through medical and psychological surveillance, the private individual came to possess interiority, dimensionality, and depth. It is no coincidence that the invention of photography happened simultaneously and was used as a tool in science and psychology in order to represent the memory of individuals, their bodies, and gestures. Neurologists like Jean-Martin Charcot used photography to develop a visual psychology in which images of patients were used in diagnosis, recording, clinical suggestion, treatment, and the design of the patient's surroundings. Now, digital photographs reside in proprietary social ecosystems, are distributed across private corporate networks, and they are as abstract as money. Each shared digital photograph pays an unwitting debt to the host corporation, who in turn licenses the metadata, contacts, biometrics, facial gesture, and geolocation to its clients. In this way, the intimate act of photography becomes a financial and disciplinary one. Photography is a prosthesis, a surrogate for its maker, and a tally of their lived experiences. Furthermore, it has a quantifiable value to the corporation that collects it. But the idea that photography and money have become immaterial is an illusion. Computer and camera hardware are typically composed of at least 66 different minerals mined around the world. The photograph is each device you are looking at and the one you are carrying in your pocket. No longer is it simply a representation of your sense of vision. It is also a literal sensor that records your reactions, gestures, and attention. Wherever there is a camera taking a photograph, somewhere there is also a hole in the ground and people who dug it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. Bill, would you like to unmute? Thank you.
Sure. Yes, thank you, David, so much. And thank you, Simon, for the introduction to join this group. You'll have to forgive my voice here. David, it really is a remarkable work. And hearing the lecture preceding it just helped me think through some of the other things that you were trying to do in that piece. I have to say I was a little disappointed to know that in the exhibit, it's only the one channel, not the two side by side, because the two side by side really gives you that kind of talliness of the tally. But let me just offer some reflections on the piece, and then a couple questions for David along the way. And I sort of did this in like the boring old school, like formal way. So forgive me, please humor me. I think that the tally is a remarkable work. It's at once a reflection on the culture of the copy and the fascination with replication and mechanical reproduction, a la Hillel Schwartz and Walter Benjamin, but also explicitly an engagement with debt. For the tally, historically, is not a copy. It's not a replica in the strict sense of a point-for-point reproduction. It's rather one thing that's made to be broken into two unique pieces, each individual piece's own uniqueness in turn, helping to warrant the commitment or the pledge that the device was made to bind, right? The whole point of a tally is you break it and the edges are all uneven, and only these two will ever fit together again because of the uniqueness of each piece and the jaggedness of the break. Tallies were widely used in China from the ancient period to the present. Similarly, in Europe, where tallies had their heyday in the medieval period, used to record credit and debt simultaneously, they'd be inscribed with a record of a transaction, so many bushels of rice promised to the creditor at such and such a date, and then the stick would be broken into two, one held by each party. The part held by the creditor, in turn, itself could circulate as the promise of a promise to pay. Thus, money was born. So this piece, with its dual frames in the way that I watched it originally, and I also watched it like over and over again, which was just a lot of fun to do, this piece recalls the tally's duality and invokes debt's duality. And it leans quite heavily on a number of ethnological texts, which is just fascinating to me. And I'd love to hear David talk about why that happened. Like, why is Marcel Mauss here? Why is David Graeber here? Because to me, as an anthropologist, this kind of brings to mind ethnography's two pieces too. No matter how thickly described, ethnographic writing is always an abstraction after the fact of lived practice. It's a form also of expropriation after experience. This is made evident in the ethnological text quoted in the piece, if in a sort of subterranean way, with the references to rituals of meeting, greetings made of tears, which are, of course, second-order descriptions of a lived social reality. And that term, social reality, lived social reality, is itself my second-order description of just the thrownness of everyday practice. And here is photography's duality as well, as the narrator discusses and as becomes central to the story of the tally that we heard in David's lecture. One of the many points here is that photography's and money's immateriality are, of course, an illusion. As the narrator says, there's 66 different minerals in our devices to record the world through a digital image. And quoting loosely here, the image is also no longer simply a representation of your sense of vision, but a literal multimodal sensor that records your reactions, gestures, location, affect, attention, and other relations besides, always within now a corporate enclosure. So much more than seeing, and a hole in the ground, and the people who dug it, and racialized global extraction, and a nationalist project. And what do we see then in this piece and in the works it draws from? Marcel Mauss was quite clear in his essay on the gift, which is quoted extensively here, that something like capitalist market exchange sat alongside the gift in what he called primitive and archaic societies, that there was something that looked like capitalism back then alongside the gift, and that the essence of the gift still lurked beside our own market institutions. In Kelley's work, we see that mixing of global capitalism and global ambition through imperial expansion that harks back to the Silk Road and another mode of expropriation, as well as all of that work of preservation, high-tech mechanization, and salvage. So many things here intertwining and mixing. The tally, as I said, is always a thing torn asunder, always broken, but it's made to be put back together again. Tallies allow people to agree to create a relationship of inequality, subordination to the other's orders, as it's put in the film. But it also allows us to imagine debt as a kind of extension of relations through space and time, relations that we can continually break and reunify as a form of life rather than death. This was also one of Mauss's points. When the gift, if the debt is ever fully repaid, life ceases. The extension of relationality ceases. So in those relations of debt, we have to find a hope for life, not just a form of death. That demands an alternative morality, which is one of the projects that Mauss hoped he would help kind of name and institute. Now, the gift, for those of you who haven't had to read it 10 million times, the gift begins with a long section called In Memoriam. This has been edited out of, most of it's been edited out of most translations in English, except for the new Jane Geyer translation. And what the In Memoriam section is Mauss's account of his own debts to his compatriots, all of whom were killed during World War I. And the book ends with his remarks on the stirrings of what he hoped would become a new mutualism, a new form of cooperativism that would mitigate the kind of consolidation of capitalist monopoly that he was witnessing in his day, and which David Graeber, the late David Graeber, one of our war dead in this struggle for new forms of representation of economy and re-envisionings of the economy, which David Graeber also encouraged us to see, if only just off to the side, not ever clearly in our field of vision. In her translation, Jane Geyer wrote that Mauss's method was a method of, quote, inspirational pathways, meetings, and companionship. The idea was to open up a dense territory, which also permits new relations and relationships to be made as we explore afresh our existing connections to Marcel Mauss as a foundational text. Kelly's work shows a kind of shunting of relations. The two pieces of the tally have returned together in the screening that you just saw, where generally this would be the end of the relation, but we see instead that the things put together are not quite right. The worker and attendant machines toil, the reconstructed ruins speak. There's an uneasiness here, and an uneasiness in the juxtaposition of the two pieces of the tally as well. That unease invites us to consider other pathways just off to the side of the relations performed for us here, one's alternative to the Belt and Road, perhaps, beyond the nationalist inscription of heritage towards something more worldly, perhaps. Mauss wrote, quote, "We are only looking to show this, the survival beside the laws of the market of another law, another economy, and another mentality." This was also David Graeber's mission. And I think it's the exhortation of these speaking statues and frescoes and the whirring factories that cry out for another mentality, to re-notch and then re-break that tally, putting us into our acknowledgement of the relationship of debt to these representations and those of others with whom we share the raw materials of the world, to help dig us out of the various holes we've dug ourselves into. So David, thank you. It's really compelling work, as I said. I did watch it like 5 or 6 times, right? At first, I didn't actually see the little mouth moving on the fresco. I only noticed it after I saw the mouth moving on in the building thing, right? I was like, oh, I have to go watch it again. And then I didn't quite catch all of the dancing of the blue guy, right? So I'm like, wow. One of those things where both after repeated viewings, the pieces kind of came together for me. So just utterly fascinating the way that you did it, and terrific use of the ethnological material, which I'd love to hear you say a bit more about, since you didn't really talk about it in the lecture just now. But thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for your comments. That was really informative, and I love the idea, sort of the argument for keeping it as the 2 channels, so that it literally embodies the tally and how where they come together, and where there's the irregular fit or not the ability not to fit. Yeah, super interesting. And I wasn't aware of, I'll have to look at the Jane Geyer translation. I'm not sure if the translation I have has that first passage, but maybe just a response to the question about why I brought in these ethnographic texts into this. I think that it happened that I was reading Dave Graeber's book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years, leading up to this trip to Dunhuang, my partner had been invited to an artist residency there, and I was thinking about, well, what am I going to do if I come along on this trip? I'm wondering how it relates to what I've been working with, and so I was reading Graeber's book, and the whole section on sort of medieval Buddhist thought about sort of tallies with heaven and so forth. And so thinking about visiting the caves, and then also I have done a number of works in China thinking about its modernization and the impact on communities and also on the environment and raw materials. I had been following a lot about the Belt and Road program, and so as I did research, sort of concurrently reading Graeber and thinking about that with research about Belt and Road, it just seemed to fit in an interesting way. That image that he has in the book of the symbolon, it just rang a bell for me as a kind of as an analogy for what photography does too, where I always feel like it sort of stands in as an index for experience or the world, but it's not the world, it's not a supplement. And so it feels like a real analog to the way that money works as well. And so I ran with it, and it led me to other texts like the mouse text.
That's wonderful, David. I want to open this up to conversation, but I just want to make a small comment. And I told David that I was going to ask him this question. So the small comment is that when Bill was talking about the 2-channel, and talking about how Mauser's introduction includes this kind of reflection on war. And I said this during the last event with Ravi and Ravi Gunawardena and Miles Coolidge, and that is, I don't really know what raw materialism is because I kind of just made it up. But there are two ideas, and one of which is that the word raw is a mirror image of war. So I was always thinking about how raw materials, was in this kind of dyadic relationship to war. And I just want to say that when you said you couldn't notice, you didn't notice certain aspects of the video because you were looking at the other one, right? I think in a way that bifurcated vision not only pictures the inequality, the impossibility of coming to be completely equal, but that you can only look at one while something else is going on. And it's as a type of resistance to the assumption of totality, so there's an ethical dimension to the formal organization. But okay, so David, I've been meaning to ask you for months now. I'm particularly taken with this section in the young women's dormitory, in part because it reminds me a little bit of Noel Birch and Alan Sekula's film. No, I can't remember the name of it. The Other Side of what is it called?
Sea or something like that.
Yes, I can't remember the name of it. But what I was really, really taken with also is that there's a blue figure dancing Yvonne Rainer's Trio A. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it is a tracing, I assume, from the 1978 film of Yvonne Rainer dancing Trio A. And this is something that you and I would know, but practically no one else would know, or no one who doesn't know Yvonne Rainer would know. So I just really want to hear you talk about that.
Okay. I didn't prepare for my response for you. It's been a busy week, but I'm going to try to do it improvisationally. I think Well, why Trio A there? I mean, I have nowhere near as much familiarity and relation to that work as you do, having actually learned it and performed it. For those of you who don't know what Trio A is, it's a sort of canonical postmodern dance piece created, choreographed and performed by Yvonne Rainer, who happened to be, when I started graduate school at UC Irvine 15 years ago, she had moved at the same year to Irvine to be a distinguished professor there, and I studied with her and worked closely. She was my thesis advisor, and so this piece, what I understand about this piece, or why it touches me, is this montage or composition of everyday pedestrian gestures that through their combination, through the montage, become something greater than the parts. And yet it still has something to do with the quotidian and the everyday and the process of looking at people. In a way, it kind of almost, you might call it a documentary dance by pulling little pieces from the world. And so, and then also, so that's one part of it, I could kind of see it as a sort of documentary montage in the form of postmodern dance, but also that it has become such a famous piece, right? Like for certain filmmakers or artists or writers, right? One thing you do can become this giant icon of your of your body of work or your personality or your reputation, and I think it's one of the things, although there's many that distinguish Yvonne, including her films, but that one in particular is so quoted and repeated, and people have performed it backwards. People have performed it in large groups. It's been taught around the world, and so it has a certain ubiquity that doesn't detract from its beauty and perfection. And so there's something about that, about its reproducibility, and yet the inability to reproduce it. As if you talk to Yvonne, she always will say, what that needs, if somebody's has to learn it from a professional dancer that has been given sort of the touch from Yvonne and trained by Yvonne to be able to teach it. It's not something one can learn from a video. So certainly my blue man dancing, it fails at performing Trio A because it was, as Simon said, traced or copied from the film from the 70s of Yvonne performing it. And a funny little aside is that I showed the film to Yvonne, and she told me that my robot needs tuning.
That's funny. Okay. Yeah, the one thing about Trio A also, and the reason that it is impossible for people to learn without learning it from an authorized transmitter, is that the gaze of the dancer is choreographed. So the body is doing something, but where the dancer is looking is also very, very specific. And so you cannot actually learn that from the document. You cannot really learn it from the video. It has to be a re-embodied thing. Okay, so I wonder if anyone has questions or would like to make a comment. You can just use the raise hand icon on the bottom if you like. I have to scan all 3 pages to make sure that folks are, I'm not missing anybody. well, while we wait for
if people are going to be shy, just I'll just throw something in to the mix, just based on what you just said, Simon. You know, it would, this is a whole other project maybe, but it would really be fascinating to somehow document how people encounter the piece, whether it's in 2 channels or 1, and even sort of like talk to them afterwards about what they saw. You know, what did you see? What were you looking at? That kind of a thing. And because I think that there is this kind of like documentary film modality to parts of it, but then the weirdness starts to happen, right? And the other weirdness is, of course, the overlay of this narration, which I think, I mean, is just really strange, right? I mean, to me, I'm like, that's Marcel Mauss, right? But to like a normal person, it must be like super weird. Like, what is this, right? I mean, and I would just love to have kind of a, you know, like reader response kind of thing with the piece, and especially knowing that it's being exhibited through the one screen, and how people's encounter with it differs because of that.
Yeah, that you know, I feel like we made the decision in this exhibition to show it as a single channel, in part because it was about moving it into this group exhibition environment and having it also then work in relationship to these other bodies of work in the space, and it does change it. So the way that it works as a single channel is that it's the same audio narration and sound score repeated. So you watch the footage at Dunhuang in the desert, at the caves, once through, and then you hear the same text over again as you watch that. So it's a different kind of viewing experience, I would imagine. But I think that's a really good point, like how what is remembered, because you also, in any case, there's a loss. Whether you watch it sequentially or you watch it simultaneously, there's a loss because your attention is limited.
No, it's interesting because in the context of the way it's being displayed now, it's sort of like a tally in time, not space, right? It's sort of a temporal breakage, which is interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Simon, I see that there's a question in the chat. I'll just.
Oh, okay.
Antonio writes, did you experience any other kind of hostility while staying at the City American doing a documentary? That sounds threatening to locals. You know, I didn't, people were really generous. There wasn't any hostility. The one thing was which was really strange and was actually kind of interesting in terms of thinking about new technology and how it's being used, particularly in China, I guess, in the case of surveillance, was that my assistant, who was mainland Chinese woman, who was helping me out when I asked if I could go to the town where the actual mine was, and she called a local hotel asking if they would accept a foreigner to stay there. We left our hotel after the phone call and went out to dinner, and we came back. Someone had already traced the call to her phone and knew that her phone and her identity numbers were registered at that hotel, and had told us that we had to leave. So it happened really quickly, the way that we were sort of caught trying to inquire about this thing. And it was really interesting that it was such a sensitive subject. And yeah, that was the only moment that happened, that we were sort of anticipating something might happen and being careful with our files and trying to upload things so I wouldn't lose them if we got our hard drives confiscated. But that never happened. I think it was just more of a kind of intimidation, less of actual action.
Yeah, when I worked on something, in fact, when I did a project about Yvonne Rainer in Beijing a couple of years ago, I stayed in Beijing, but not at a hotel. And because I didn't stay at a hotel, I had to register with the police, and they took me to the police station and they put me on video. You know, they were recording a video, and they asked me 3 questions. See if I can remember them. Okay, I think the first was, do you have a driver's license? Do you and have you ever been to Xinjiang, or do you intend to go to Xinjiang? And I forgot what the third one was, but it's all, you know, it's all kind of related. So I think that the system that in a way it's described as this network, as this web, is so thoroughly saturated, you know, in China. Anyway, I just thought, you know, when the law meets art, we should know about these things. Let's see. So
there was one other question from Antonio again, asking about the consent of from the models and the rights to license the images to Getty. And yeah, I mean, when we arranged the first project that I did, the one that's called the Rare Earth Image Bank, when we arranged to hire the actors to perform for the photographs, we did have them sign a modeling release, and we paid them to perform for the photographs, knowing that we would have to, if I wanted to complete the project, which was to actually then redistribute the photographs as stock photography, that I would need that release because it's quite intense, what stock agencies require and expect. So yeah, we did get permission.
I see Jeannie has a question. Jeannie, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, thank you. David, first off, what an incredible work. That was just, I really enjoyed seeing that, and it's an ambitious project and just seems like such an evolution of so many threads of your work, including the copy, this interest in dance and movement, and also labor and global exchange. So it's really great to see those coming together. I also had a question about the images that you took, the photographs, the staged photographs, and was thinking about, also as someone who's worked with people in the field, particularly internationally, is to think about what you are exchanging. And it looked like to me, or from what you're saying, I'm appreciating that you're also trying to tease out some of what they anticipate you want them to perform, but that you are also performing different roles as the photographer, because you are somewhat subverting your role as the photographer and not, you're sort of posing, you're acting in some ways. It seemed to me. So I actually wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about that process. And yeah, it just struck me as a rich kind of terrain to explore your relationship in terms of what internationally, like what is someone performing in terms of what they imagine you want as part of that global exchange that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, nice to see you, Jeannie. Thanks for your comment. As many things are when you're working on a new idea with an art project, you don't necessarily have it fully fleshed out, in starting. And so I guess it was interesting because in order to find places to work, like photo studios in Inner Mongolia, and to arrange for locations and so forth, everyone, wanted to know, what is this for? What are you doing here? And so a lot of the local photographers who had studios and equipment that we could rent and so forth would do commercial photography, but they also felt like when you weren't doing a commercial photograph for a client, then you should be making, documentary photographs that show the real world and so when I showed them some samples of stock photography of what kind of pictures I wanted to make, they were really disappointed. They kind of thought, well, you're all the way here in Inner Mongolia and you're going to make pictures in a studio. So I feel like there was a kind of lack of interest in what I was doing, and that they felt like it wasn't, when if I said the project was about rare earth elements and about culture in Inner Mongolia, they felt like it was failing to do that, failing to achieve that. And so it was interesting, and I didn't know, I didn't know what to expect. I don't think I thought about how I would feel about it, because it was certainly a subversion of my own sort of, because stock photography is so generic and latent and kind of meant to be literally stock, like something that could be like a commodity that could be molded into something. And so it's a very different way of working to produce something that's so generic, and yet models who've worked, doing fashion photography or promotional things understand it, because it's a kind of, it is a commercial language that you understand. You put on the clothes and your makeup and you try to look your best and you perform this task. And so it wasn't trouble to get the people who I was collaborating with to perform for the photographs. I think it was more of a disconnect or misfire with the photographic and art community there. I think also the documentary filmmaker who hosted us at his yurt camp also didn't really get what we were doing, because he really makes super interesting ethnographic films with minorities, shamans and hunters and nomads in that part of the world that is sort of fading fast. And so for me to stage these kind of very banal commercial photographs, he just didn't have any interest in it.
I think Jeannie points out something that is actually touched on upon in your film, and that is we are always already performing some sort of expectations, for the other. And in any exchange, but especially in a transnational, translinguistic exchange where you don't communicate directly, there is always an expectation of what the other is there for, it's doing, and it's always a mistranslation it's always a misfiring of some sort. But I think it gets into this moment in the film where I think you were quoting Maus when you said no one can actually get out of this gift economy. That you can't get out. In other words, we are tethered to the sociality of the human through this expectation of the other, through thinking, well, why are you here? What are you doing? What am I in relationship to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting connection between the two projects that you bring up, Simon.
Yeah, it seems to me that you I mean, at least explicitly in the film, you compare these three things. You compare economy, money, economy, spirituality, and the idea of spiritual debt, and photography, and how they. I mean, I can go on and on about how they intersect with each other, but it's interesting to think about how nothing that is spiritual or monetary nor photographic is ever just what you see. It's always doing something else. So Nutapal Ma has a reflection. Just says, thank you, David. Evocative visual tapestry of past present as a lens to the socio-political unfolding of contemporary China and her presence in the global context. Great, thank you, Paul. See if there's any other questions or comments. Well, it's 419. David, I wonder if you have some reflections, or Bill, that you want to share before we adjourn.
Well, just one last thing, and maybe it is apparent in how I gave the talk today about the two projects, but for me, as a kind of discovery as I was going through these doing these two projects and reflecting on them as I put them together, this idea of how images of cultural heritage become instrumentalized in a way very similar to how commercial advertising images are also instrumentalized to sell, right? To sell something, a product, or to brand a corporation. It's, you know, I think it's obvious to most, but for me, approaching the stock photography and trying to construct those images there in Inner Mongolia, and then thinking about it in context of how China is using, and how many countries use their cultural heritage and the images that are produced from that as a kind of, you know, cultural capital or soft power, was I think one of the aspects that wasn't what I was looking for going into it, but certainly came across in the process that I appreciated, and that people picked up on in our conversation, and particularly Bill's with his really wonderful reflection on watching the film and hearing the lecture. So thank you, Bill, for that. I really appreciate how thoughtful and in depth, and also your sharing the extended knowledge about Maus and that translation of the introduction.
David, I have one last question for you, and that is the idea of stock photography, or the idea of using stock photography as a medium. It strikes me as being a very interesting strategy because so many artists work with stock photography, but they use it as a type of appropriation, right? They appropriate from that which is sort of like in the commons, and not in the commons, financially, but they appropriate from this field, this well from which they would extract. And it seems to me that your strategy is actually awaiting for others to use it, but to certainly use it to redirect it, not according to your intention. Mm-hmm. Right. So it puts into question the relationship between debt and intention, to me, in the sense that in some ways, whatever is used, appropriated, paid for, whatever, is going to be resignifying. And that resignification also continues the debt. In a way, it has no direct emotional feeling, in relationship to the feeling of being indebted to the other in the tally, right? So that to me also seems like a type of shorthand of capitalism or money. What do you think, Bill? You're the expert on this.
Well, you're just sending my mind off in a whole other direction, and I'm thinking about what is the book called? Made in China, Amelia Pang's book about sort of factory labor in China, and it begins with the story of her trying to trace this message that was put in I don't remember what it was, but like an Amazon package, and someone opens it up and finds a thing that says, please send this letter to a human rights organization, blah, blah, blah. And in some ways, David's stock photography is doing that same kind of work, right? Putting the little Easter egg of the salt of the earth kind of thing in that really beautiful image that you could just imagine being easily appropriated into any kind of glossy corporate magazine. but containing a really powerful exhortation to remember the relation that is there in, in this case, in the image, but then more broadly in, all of the things around us, right? All of the Amazon boxes everywhere.
Right. Yeah. Well, what I could say one thing to that too, Simon. One other way that I tried to, how can I say, give the pictures a signature was through the practice of keywords, because when you submit something on of course everywhere now, even as I was preparing my PowerPoint presentation, if you drop an image in, an artificial intelligence already tells you what's in the image, right? There'll be a subtitle that says people in a field holding, fruit or something like that. So when you submit to a stock agency, you have to give your human judged keywords. And so I would put in the ones that were there that I felt like needed to be in there. So things like, even though it wasn't apparent in the photograph, I would write rare earth elements and Inner Mongolian language, or Inner Mongolian culture, or ethnic identity, and things like that, and to see what the algorithms or whoever was judging these keywords would allow to pass into it. So when someone would search for that, they could find that picture. So there are other ways of kind of finding ways to kind of embed something in there, although a lot of it didn't remain.
That's so fascinating, because in a way you're saying I'm guilty when when no crime has been charged, right? Because keyword is the currency of censorship and control.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, this is why anything that has Hong Kong in it or Xinjiang in it, it's a red flag in China already.
Yeah.
Well, on that beautiful optimistic note. So thank you so much, Bill, and thank you, David. I want to ask our many friends here to perhaps unmute and show your face, and we would love to see you. I see a few
Hey, Steve.
alums, and
Everybody. Hey, Sandy.
I have to say, some of my favorite people in the entire world are here right now. Okay, so let's unmute and give David a round of applause. Yes. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. This is recorded, and it will be available to view at some point. We don't know exactly how yet, but we're working with the university and the gallery to put this conversation online. Okay, so have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, David.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Simon.